Hey everyone, I just figure it's time to do some drawing. I haven't done it for a while because I've been pretty sick. But aside from that, I'm feeling pretty good about it now. So yeah, I've just been doing writing and other things of that nature. So have thought about lots of drawing and art. So have lots of ideas. But um, yeah, I'm pretty out of it. So what I want to start with is maybe just some drills or something that are just nice and easy to do. Um, just changing. Okay, cool. So, good old circle. That'll tell you a lot of things. That's not bad actually, considering. Yeah, that's not the best. Okay. What about lines? I don't have control of like the start point, end point. That's interesting. That might just be my seating position. Um, so I don't have pressure control. Yeah, my pressure control is way off. Um, missed, 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 missed. I'm just trying to get a tangent line on this circle. You know, at least until it's like confident. So these two were at least almost confident, but like this one's off. Shows that I'm like rattled. And sometimes just when you're rattled, you get in your head when you're drawing. So just trying to get rid of that. Yeah, it's a little closer. Mm. The top of my shoulder blade's hurting. So that's the supraspinatus muscle, which is like a muscle that you use a lot when you draw. It's just like, I'm not used to this. Okay, that's good. There we go. What about circle the other way? Yeah, that's okay. That's not the worst. Like, there's always going to be these, what do you call them? Like, these sort of 5 millimeter sort of errors. These are ones that I'm like totally okay with. Like, if I'm 5 millimeters off, that's maybe a bit too far, but like, that's not the worst thing in the world. Or like, you do a circle like this, and maybe it's like, that's like too far off where it should have been. But like that's a 5 millimeter error kind of thing. So it's not like the end of the world, if that makes sense. So also when you're going from point to point, say there's a point here and a point here and a point here and a point here, you don't want to be like going here and here. That's no good. You want to be like pretty close, you know? And like if you're coming from here to here, like that ended early because my pressure was off. So that's not too bad, but you know, this is a little bit off, but that's okay. So you want to have a control within about this distance or smaller. Just even to start doing things. So, I mean, when you might be just doing random strokes or something, you're not going to be that accurate. Like maybe you're going to be making like errors that are larger than this. So like if you start drawing like a lattice or something from strokes, like these are inaccurate to each other. So if we pick this, we pick this, that's not very good. Like that's at least like that far off, like that far off, right? Something like that. I mean, that's kind of like this 5mm thing. It's not too bad, but you can obviously get quite a bit tighter than that. But I'm not too worried. So basically what you want when you're practicing strokes is you want to practice your normal stroke, the kind of like opposite side stroke, which is like where your elbow's up. Then you want to be doing like your horizontal strokes. You want to be doing some vertical strokes. And anything sort of in between, so that you can get like the finer muscle changes into your head of like how you're specifically changing which muscle is contracting. Just like a warm up in in any sort of skill. So you just do it nice and slow, and then you kind of like get into rhythms. And if you want rhythm, just do double lines, or you can do line. So rhythm helps when you're doing like maybe even going back up to the top or something. Like you're just allowing the muscle to go back to its ordinary position in like a rhythm. So rhythm is like as important as a stroke, because when you're going to be drawing in rhythms. So you're going to be like, whoa. And you're going to be thinking like, oh, I need this to be done within this sort of time frame or something, and I want these rhythms to sort of like anticipate what's going to happen. So you'll just be using, like if you have to use two lines to maybe approximate something, you might use that, just practically speaking, so that you can get closer to the thing. And if it's got like the right rhythm, you can maybe like just use that rhythm that's similar to get something that's a little closer. So often you'll see, like, if I'm trying to draw a face or something, there'll be like sort of rhythm searching, like, oh, maybe that, but maybe it's like this. And it looks messy, but it's basically checking which is the right rhythm that you want to be using. So you're just kind of like, is it this area? Or is it this area? Is it this thing happening like this? Is it this thing happening like this? What's like, you're just trying to find what that rhythm is, and like meet that somehow. Like I'm always going to be drawing faces because I want to eventually be doing manga type stuff, but obviously I'm approaching it a little bit different than everyone else. So I don't want to actually practice what I want to be good at, which is weird because you'd be like, well, why aren't you practicing what you want to be good at? It's in part because when you practice something, there, I mean, there are 3 or 4 layers. I think there is your imagination, what you can imagine. Um, if you can't imagine like anime or what you're going to draw, like you can't imagine the realism or you can't imagine the style that you're going to be drawing in. If you can't imagine that, then you can't draw it. You can accidentally draw it, but that's a completely different thing. So imagination is in itself a skill to train. After that, there are things like your methods of how you're going to do something and the kind of properties that you have, like whether you're strong, whether you're fast, or whatever. So if you're fast, you can iterate. You can be like, oh, there's a rhythm here, and then there's this thing here, and then I don't know, I can just go off this, and maybe we can choose this line, and then this. Like, if you're fast, you can just sort of go from one place to another place, and you can just use one rhythm to bounce into another rhythm or something, right? And that is like one of the properties. So your speed of like bouncing around, while your force or your strength is like knowing, oh, okay, so I want this part to relate to this part in a certain way. How do I want it to relate? I don't know. It's got to have like this triangle and this triangle come up here or whatever. I don't know. Like, because you want to spot like some cheekbone or something, and where the cheekbone is in the position of something. And so you're measuring things against each other, and whenever you draw something, say we're going to draw a box or something, like when you draw to it, I'm purposely going to miss these lines somewhat. You see how this one is off, this one is off, this one's off by a little bit, and it makes like these sort of weird compounding errors where this is no longer, it doesn't look like a box. It looks like a trapezoid kind of thing like this, because these ones both miss to the inside and then this one missed to the outside. So you've got like this sort of thing going on. Like this sort of thing going on. And when you force things into position, you don't necessarily hit all those marks perfectly. Like, oh, I've got to like actually hit that mark, and I've got to hit that mark, and I've got to hit this mark. Though that is somewhat forcing it, right? And you have to be kind of like strong to do that, because you'll get tired. What you sometimes are doing with force is like you might do a rhythm thing and you will force the square shape over the errors. Right? You see this little mistake here, probably mistake up here, mistake here. I'm forcing away from the points I'm connecting to maintain the shape itself. So the shape itself doesn't get distorted into this. Instead of following these points, I'm using like this mental force in my mind to maintain a strong square shape. And that's what you'll do when you're drawing as well. You'll be like mentally forcing in your mind different relationships with the drawing or something. You might be like, but then I want this to come back. But then you're like, wait, a fringe should be like really high, so let's go this way. Like you might be thinking in your head like what you want it to be, and you're maintaining that. That's what force is. So speed is kind of like you're able to search really quickly and pivot off the changes you make. Like, oh, maybe not that chin. Maybe this one has to have like, there's a cheekbone here that you know, you want to express or something, so you put that in, but you do it really fast and you're just whipping around like the entire drawing to try and scope out something. And so you're like, bop, 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 bop. While force, you got to have like your idea in mind and you're shaping it for that rather than sort of bouncing back and forth. Then you've got fitness. Fitness is your ability to just stick in there when it's like getting tough and weird and strange. And, just like, let's say you've got a bunch of lines and you're like, oh, yeah, I'm super used to this. This is easy, whatever. And then it's like, well, now you've got to do this thing that has like this, and then it goes like this. And you've got to do a bunch of these. You're like, change, whatever. So this change that you're going through, like, and then you've got to change from this pattern to like this pattern. All the time changing patterns or changing goals or changing whatever. This is also a fitness thing. Like you're going through like an obstacle course of like different things that you're drawing. You're not forcing the same idea to get it all accurate. You're just changing continuously like what the specific requirement is, and then there's got to be another pipe that does some other different thing, and then you're like, oh, okay, I've got to follow this one, but then I've got to follow this one. And you're just changing task, or you're doing just a lot of drawing. And that's a fitness thing. So your fitness is just going to reduce if you haven't done things for a while. And you just kind of need to build that up. It's like very hard to build by not overusing force, because you use enough force, you get tired. You overuse speed and everything gets like a bit too messy. Fitness is more just like you can go through a process and just take it through the method entirely. There is another property, which is compass, but I won't go into that one. That's like the ability to know what you're doing ahead of what you're doing. Like an expert will just understand, like, this is the thing that needs to be drawn, and that's a completely different thing. So your methods and the kind of properties you have to employ your methods, like your strengths as an illustrator, not like, oh, I can do shadows really well or whatever. But if you don't have a way to implement the things that you imagine, like you don't have the properties to like actually pull them off, like accuracy is an element of force, but it's also an element of speed as well. Like you need a certain amount of speed, but you need like a certain amount of force so that you can control like the fine muscle contractions. This is the first one, imagination. So I train my imagination, sometimes by writing, sometimes by just watching and whatever art. And then 2, methods. This is another thing. I haven't trained this in a while. I'm pretty confident in my speed, force, and fitness. I'm not too upset about like not training that. And then the third thing is refinement. Refinement. So I purposely don't train this because I don't want to refine something that I haven't got down. Like I want to be able to imagine something first. I've got methods. I can improve some methods. So like I have this idea of the Monet method that I'm trying to like develop and understand better. I'm also trying to develop my own sort of method, this kind of like chemical ink method kind of thing. That's also going to be sort of a style as well. But I'm trying to develop those slowly so that they become very honest. And then refinement is like one of the last tricks, which would be, oh, okay, how specifically does this face not match up with the way that it should be? Like, and how are the ways that you're going to use the coloring, the shading, everything to make it pop the way that it should? Um, I don't know. Um, I feel like this drawing is from like underneath. And yeah. So these are like my three things that I'm thinking about right now is like imagination, methods, and refinement. And imagination is important to practice just as much as anything else. Refinement is the thing that people would go to if they're feeling insecure. Like they're like, oh, I just need to refine it. I need to make it look good, and then I'm going to be better as a drawer. But it's going to improve your results, but it's not going to improve how you feel at the core. So I feel like it's very important not to over fixate on that. A lot of people, what they do when they're trying to get refinement is they use a lot of references. And they say, like, instead of imagination, they want like a mental library of like things to do. And so what they'll do is they'll do like master studies, which I'm not against because it will make you very good at refinement. It will also educate you as to how other people are doing things and kind of like give you ideas. But I also feel there's a role to play of just imagining things. Like you just imagine it and no one else stands in the way of what you're trying to imagine. Something I'm trying to do recently is understand three dimensions properly in a weird way. So in three dimensions, you have three things. You have pitch, you have yaw, and you have roll. So, obviously roll, you have this roll axis, whatever. You have yaw, which is kind of like you're going left and right. And you have like this, it's going like up and sort of down. But of course you have like a XY axis, right? But anything that's like moving, it's got like a roll axis that it's going to do something on to change its like orientation or whatever. And then it's got this turning action this way, or it can pitch up and down. And you got that kind of way of tracking three-dimensional movements. Like, so a three-dimensional movement, it might go through these things in some three-dimensional way, whatever. And it might be this complex three-dimensional movement, and you don't understand exactly about the roll that happens in here, or every single transition of yaw because there's roll. You're like, oh, which one is it? Is it pitch or is it yaw because of what roll it is? It can be difficult to track where something is at any point in time there. So what I'm trying to do with three dimensions, where I'm trying to understand it, is I'm trying to understand how everything works together. Like if you're doing pitch, yaw, and roll, if you're sculpting something, like, I don't know, let's say you have a kind of you're sculpting from a form and you're sculpting that out. You're like, okay, and across halfway down this thing, we want to sculpt this out and move it along to here or whatever. Like you're sculpting. How do you know where, for example, this transition from the eye and the cheekbone drops back into, the ear canal that the ear is based around? How are you specifically referencing this turn from the forehead and then it turns around to this other plane? Because this is very important when you're thinking about light. So light, if it's hitting on this plane, like here, then the fact that this has turned, what is this? Is this 90 degrees? If it is 90 degrees along this corner, then this is going to be much darker than this one if this one's light. So this could be all lit up, and then that means this is all relatively dark, except, planes in here, like planes on the nose. Like these are going to be lit up because some of these are sequenced with like in the same spot as this thing. So that's going to be lit. And I don't know, maybe there's even things on the lips. Like just parts of the lips that are going to be lit up, and parts of the chin that might be lit up, and along the cheekbone, and I don't know what else. And so this element here, this is a downward plane, or it's not a downward plane, not yet. But any downward plane, so like this nose here, this is going to be even darker. And like this in here is going to be even darker. Because, like even though this part is light, because of the plane directions. So how do you, in your mind, understand this turn when it's two-dimensional? Like, how are we understanding this curve, and how are we expressing what that turn is on a face? Like on a skull, whatever. Have a skull, and then it's got like cheekbones, right? Cheekbones. You got like the orbital bone. You've got like the brow. Whatever that comes to like the bridge of the nose. And then you've got like this sort of cavity thing here for like these muscle striations that go to like the lips. You've got this sort of thing, which then goes into like the, I don't know, goes into like the teeth. But like bones that come off the side, the jawbone connects in somewhere here at the ear or something, I don't know. And it's part of this mandible that is being represented here. I don't know. While this one, it's just kind of like so you have like this sort of hole here with where the cheeks are, between where you get that jaw. And so when you look at the skull and you think, Like, where exactly is it turning here? And when does it turn so much or so quickly that it becomes like 90 degrees? Because say if we've got a cylinder, that's a really bad drawing of a cylinder. Oh my god. So you've got like a cylinder at this part, then from this part to this part, it changes 90 degrees. And so there might be a slight catching of light along here, and then, then it will start getting really dark after here or something. So you've got this cylinder, and that's essentially what's happening along this turn here. Also along these like orbital bones, along here there's some sort of cylindrical kind of turn that's happening on the outside of the cheeks, right? That's turning back. Now under the cheekbone, you don't necessarily have that. So then how are you trying to understand how the 3 dimensions shift around that? Like, okay, up here, this is a dome. Like this whole thing is a dome though. Once you get high enough, it just turns into a dome. So that means the gradient is going back this way, but it's also going along this way and up this way. And it's sort of just following like spherical rules, but it's not quite spherical because that's not how the skull is built. It's not built completely spherical. It's got like a rectangular shape, and different people's heads shapes are different. So how do you track, like this isn't even a flat surface along the forehead. It's kind of got like a, I don't know, along the brow it's definitely bumped, but like there's also like more ridges around this area. And there's a very organic turning nature to things. Like they don't just stay on very rigid planes, which is difficult to understand. Like, how do you understand that? And that's where I'm talking about 3 dimensions. Pitch, yaw, and roll doesn't really cut it as an artist, because you can't really understand how that's working. And this is one of the biggest things when trying to understand form. When you're trying to understand, like, oh, I'm drawing a, oh, sorry. I'm drawing a sphere, and oh, this turns like this, and then this. If you're just drawing this line and you don't understand what turn is actually happening and how, like you're just mechanically thinking it turns, it's not going to have the same effect or the same understanding of what you're drawing just mentally in your mental. You don't have the mental picture in your head. You're not imagining the actual 3 dimensions of it. And that's going to make all these drawings way less accurate, have way less feeling, and just be kind of like unintentional mistakes. Like the mistakes might look like the thing, but they won't be the thing that you're trying to draw. And that's kind of the problem. Like when I talked about like the square thing, joining from dot to dot to dot to dot or whatever, and you get slightly inaccurate or whatever. This is what this is. Like if you're drawing a form and you draw a form mentally, not knowing that it needs to be like, oh, it needs to be a square, then you can't make the inaccuracies in the right places. And so it will turn into like a weird trapezoid or something without you even knowing it. you might be doing like, oh, it's definitely a sphere though. It's the way it is. But unless you truly understand the three-dimensional form, you can't use force to like control all the sides, to control all the natures of it. And so it will just get less and less accurate. And you'll be drawing with mistakes rather than drawing more accurately. So three-dimensionality is something I've been thinking about a lot in like how I want to be imagining things. So, okay, how do I think of three dimensions then? Okay, so for me, I think of it like, well, honestly, I think about it with organs. So CT scans and like MRIs, they'll go into someone's chest or whatever, be scanning someone's chest, and there'll be like a shape like this. Actually, let's not do that. Let's do it like this, 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 this. This, this. Something like this. Okay, and then you can just do this. I'm just thinking more strokes wise in this way, and then this. Rather than just random contours. Okay, so there'll be like a shape, something like this, in the person's chest. So the feet are coming out of the page, and stomach sort of thing is going to be around there. There's going to be like some spleen and kidneys or something. Wait. Stomach's going to be up there. Kidneys are going to be at the back here. There's also going to be like psoas muscles and stuff that come in. Whatever. I'm not going to. And there's going to like be liver, which is like going to be like this massive. It's going to be taking up most of the space most of the time. And there's going to be like arteries and veins going up the center. The heart would have been like at the front here, like further up. I'm talking about too many layers at once here, but like, stomach's going to be sort of around here, and it's going to go into a duodenum like here. And, pancreas is going to appear somewhere along this section. And there's going to be like masses back here, like the spleen and stuff. As well as other things. Okay, but you're going to have like different sections of the liver, and there's going to be like a gallbladder that leads into here, because it's a part of the stomach, and the duodenum where the pancreas and the gallbladder and stuff, they all lead into the same place. Anyways, so inside like MRIs and CAT scans, you have this constant shifting, changing, like you can scroll back and forth up like the different images, but you have to imagine the 3 dimensions that are happening as it's scrolling back and forth. And you have to imagine like what's like in this shape. So it would be like a shape like this or whatever. Maybe it's a bit more square than that. because this is the front of a person's chest. This is like their spine, so they'll have like their spine in here. So the spine takes up like a lot of room, and then you have like your veins and arteries that are always going to be there, and lower down you get like psoas muscles. But what we don't often realize in like the chest, like, okay, here's the heart or something, is there's this three-dimensional space back here which is massive because of these contours. And like the spine is taking up like loads of area, but it's kind of segmented things into left and right, and you have like these massive compartments back here. You could have like the entire stomach up here in the front, and in the back, three-dimensionally, there's so much more space than you're expecting. You've got the heart, and you're like, well, there's not enough room for lungs. Like, oh, it's just kind of like, oh, isn't that like cheating and taking room away from the lung? And it's like, no, because then the lung can just take up this entire space here. It's not just this little teardrop. It's got all this room in the back. And like with the liver, you're like, oh, the liver is just like a little bit at the front, right? And it's like just a little liver thing. But no, it's like, boom, it's got this massive, like it's massive. It holds 10% of the blood of the body. Like it's massive. So when you're looking at something that's unintuitive, that kind of shifts and changes and has spaces you don't expect because you can't imagine how the body actually works. Then when you're going through all these different, you're going through these different slides, say the stomach might start, okay, the stomach will start as something like this, like that, like at its top, because this is like the entrance way to the top of the stomach. And then it might gain like a second air bubble thing here, because a stomach, it goes to the diaphragm, and then there's like this sort of thing, right, to the top of the stomach. So you'll get like these two slithers, because it's cutting across here, image-wise. And then, these all sort of join up, and you'll sort of lose this portion. Oh. You'll lose this portion, and then you'll sort of get like something more like this happening. Where you might have like this more diamondy shape, because as you go through this section of the stomach, when you cross section through here, it's kind of got like this depth to it or whatever. And often there'll be like liquid in the stomach, so like it'll have different colors. But then as you get down to like here or something, you'll start getting like other things coming across here, because there's another part to the stomach, which is the actual entrance into the duodenum. So like you've got kind of like this gourd-like thing. And so as you start hitting across here, this will start representing, and this will be smaller. Like this will be smaller, and then these will sort of join up, and this will become quite a bit more narrow, like this, because then you're hitting into this section here. And so how do you conceive of like all those different transitions and changes from like up here and like this sort of diamond shape, and like it joining around here or whatever. You kind of mentally configure those things together in your head so that you can start like seeing where that is three-dimensionally as it's scrolling back and forth. You'd be like, oh, okay, so this is kind of tilted this way and this one's just going into the diaphragm. And then above the diaphragm, the heart just immediately like comes here and it's like in this big position. And so as I'm transitioning, I'm watching like all these veins and stuff. Like sometimes there'll be like veins that transition or come off. Like, oh, now there's like veins that are separating and it's no longer just one artery. It's these two different arteries splitting off. Or they might travel for a moment like this into different locations, and then that'll disappear because you're going through those different layers. I mean, obviously. I think about that and I think, how do I describe this switching and changing of like rotation and size and placement across each different layer? Like, how do I describe that? Like, it might have originally started like a triangle, and then the triangle maybe has been lifted on one side to like do this because of a rotation, like a roll or something. But then, maybe it rolls back into a different position like this. Like maybe I'll indicate like the top. So that's rolled back in this position. And then all of a sudden, what it might do is it might go from this and it might split, and split into like two things. So maybe there was like this one thing at the bottom that was always there, and now it's like splitting into two. And like maybe that thing splits into two like this, comes like this, and like these things are doing their own thing until eventually they completely invert, like up this way. Like how a bird might fly or something. So sometimes you have this simultaneous rotation and you have like these splitting effects that also split. And that's kind of how I think about like the skull at the moment, is like, okay, you've got this skull and you've got like this dome on top, right? You've got this dome, but you've also got like this cylinder turning sort of side on the side of the head, and what's happening on the actual side of the head. And you've got like this, I don't know, whatever, elongated dome thing, bicycle helmet, whatever. And then you've got like these contours of like the orbitals and the orbital bone, and then like the nasal bone, and like all these contours are changing. They're doing like this thing and then they're rotating and then they're like splitting into like different forms. So when you're thinking about like an organic form that's shifting and changing, like the side of the head, like this has like one thing that's splitting this way, one thing that's splitting this way. It's kind of like this triangle that's splitting apart, where you've got one set of ideas and another set of ideas, and then you have to figure out what these gaps are. And the gaps are often gradients that sort of contain information about how these two other things are splitting. So this is a dome, but what is this? This is just an edge, right? But it's a very strange edge because it's kind of got like these ripples in it. Like it's not like an easy edge to just simply understand. Now people will just simplify it and just say like, oh, okay, like let's just get rid of that and just say like, oh, this is what's happening on the draw line. But that's not what's happening. There's something more complex happening on this side three-dimensionally than anything like that. You're getting these weird splits. And like things are contouring and changing in position as you're going from different layer to layer. It's going to be like so confusing. So when I try to understand three dimensions, I think of it in terms of this triangle, which helps me understand roll, but not just roll, like how things differentiate and change, like how they triangulate to one another. And then I also think about something I call series, because when we're going through the stomach, right, it's a series of changes. And over here. So if you remember, the initial stomach was like a little hole, and then like it gets a second hole. Well, it's starting as a hole, second hole, and then sort of this sort of thing that comes across like this, and then maybe that shifts into like a diamond shape. This is a series. This is what I call a series, like this whole thing, because as you go down these layers are a series of different shapes and changes. And so there's these roles that you have to keep track of and how they're changing, but then you have to understand the series, like, okay, across here, across here, across here, across here, across here, there's going to be different shapes. They're all going to be different. So this one might have two shapes. This one has one shape. This one has one. This one has a completely different shape. This one's like almost like a diamond compared to a rod or a cylinder. And so if an edge is changing that much, it can be very tricky to understand. So that's what I'm trying to understand when I think about three dimensions. I'm not trying to think about like, oh, there's a cube, and how does that cube function? Oh, there's a cube. Because your mind can't really wrap its head around the cube properly. It just kind of thinks of a cube and goes like, oh, a cube is a concept where you just split the lines. And it's like, yeah, you can just do that to represent a cube. Or a triangle is a concept where you split it in the other way. It's like, okay, whatever. Like your mind just doesn't understand that. It also doesn't understand all this series stuff and changing and morphing, but that's kind of the point. If you can imagine how this shifts and moves and say here, like, oh, okay, we've created this stomach shape in the actual series, there's like an actual ghost image of that stomach shape in there from that position from below or whatever. Like, oh, good. It's in there somewhere, but you never see it as that. And so in this series, you need to know what each of those steps are. And this is the hard part, because when something's splitting like this, it's rotating and it's splitting and it's changing. This gap right here has like these steps in it, and you don't understand what they are. Like, what is actually changing in the skull? So we could say like, oh, the skull is a spherical shape, and a triangular shape. Two-dimensionally makes sense, conceptually makes sense. But if we're trying to understand the contour of the side of the face, this sort of just aspect where you've got like the eyes, I don't know, like if you've got like these orbits or whatever, and it's like a nose bone there, or whatever, and you're trying to understand the contours from your imagination, not using reference. You're just trying to like understand purely from imagination how this specific line down here, how it's contouring, what it's doing, how it changes as it goes up to this dome area of the head. Like, how does the dome morph into or transpose into these other shapes? Here's a thought as well. Let's say you have like a screwdriver or something. Let's just say it's a cylinder and another cylinder. In engineering, there are ideas of like these transitions between different shapes. And so that transition between the shape, they might like fortify that with like another something just to make it stronger. And then maybe they'll like put like a hand guard around this to like protect it or something. And then they'll like do this other thing. These are these transitions between different shapes, and they will figure out how they're going to do the transition between those shapes. That's essentially what's happening here. You've got a dome, and you're going to transition between this weird ass dome, and you've got to understand it, right? It doesn't matter how accurately you're drawing it. You just got to understand what this transition is, why it's happening, from what angle you're capturing it from. You're like, there's this dome. I mean, it contours and it does like other things, like it's elongated. But there's a dome, and it goes into a forehead. But where does it transition into that forehead? Let's just say along here, whatever. And then I've got like this curved part, maybe. Just thinking. Just make the curves there. And this area, like what are the transitions that are happening? Because we do have to get to that 90-degree change, but what are the weird natures of this contour? And the reason I do this is because if you're going to be rotating everything in three-dimensional space in your head when you're imagining it, you have to kind of capture what the essence of this turn is around the side of the jaw and the cheekbone. And there's a certain point at which the cheekbone is going to stop, and it's going to turn into like just this literal side of the cheekbone. And then that goes back further into like this sort of thing, this sort of shape. And there's a muscle that comes down from the temple, and it goes underneath this, I don't know, sunglasses bone or whatever you want to call it, which goes into the jaw. I mean, this comes back to like the hole in the side of the head, which the ear is based around. But there you've got this muscle and its tendon connecting into the jaw, right? And the mandible, what's that? Where does that connect? It doesn't connect to this thing. It connects to something around here. Like, there's something, where is it? Where does that connects up to like the bottom of this thing? Somewhere in here. Somewhere in there is where you get that weird Y prong, which then goes into the mandible. So you got this weird point behind the cheekbone, which is the join of the jaw, like somewhere around here. So there's this kind of strain of muscles coming from around here because it's all connected to the jawbone. And you've got a difference of contour based on like the cheekbone. And then you've got like this hole under the cheekbone where there's space for the cheek itself that sits on top of this, right? And so this cheek and then this like outside orbital like cheekbone thing and into the cheek, and then the cheek transitions into the jaw. Like, so the cheek turns around because that's almost like a sphere, right? So we know that there's like a point at which that turns and that can get to the 90 degrees that we need. Like it can get to that 90 degrees that we need. And along here, along this outside part of the jaw and the chin, you know, it's not just a line. This is specifically connecting at that bottom part of this sort of the back part of this cheekbone where it has turned. And like, yeah, we might have like a midline down the face, or a bit more like this. We have this midline down the face. This jaw is substantially back from where the eye is. It's substantially back. It's almost to where the ear is, which is almost halfway back of the head. So it's not quite halfway back of the head, that point, but it's like, okay, so if we were to do this and this, the point from the cheekbone, right, is sort of, this is the ear canal, and then you've got this position here, which is large part of where the jaw connects in, right? Because the jaw is going to connect in this way, and it's going to come up and along here to the chin. And so then you're going to get like, there's going to have to be a cheekbone here, but then the cheekbone's going to have to stop. And it's going to have to turn into like this thingy. So this might not even go there. It might like be more here. Like, I'm using imagination here, but like that's not going to work like that because it's more shaped like this. And then there's like a cheekbone thing, like orbital bone, and then like cheekbone. And then you got like this stuff in here. Where you got stuff from like the temple coming down. connecting like this. So this isn't accurate, but at least it's giving the idea of what's happening with those transitions. So there's like this has to be longer and more elongated, and I don't know how you quite get to that cheekbone when this thing has to connect just off the ear. Like, okay, you've got the ear, and then there's this connection point just off the ear, and then there's like the eye, and then you've got the bridge of the thing, and you've got like a nose or whatever. I think it does this wedge thing like this, right? And then there's like a wedge up here. This leads back into the ear canal. So let's just make the ear canal a little bit further back. And let's just change this thing to like be whatever. This comes in this position. But like this is going to probably do something like this, right? That looks a bit more like a chimp, but that's all right, whatever. I'm not trying to draw a skull. I'm just trying to figure out like what the heck is happening in this series of changes. I'm trying to figure out the series. I'm not trying to figure out the actual shape. I'm trying to figure out how the shape changes, like the stomach changes from this to this to this, to like more like this. To this, and to this, to like this, and then like this. It does this kind of thing in the series. So okay, so see, these things have answers, right? And you could go to the answers specifically. You could check the anatomy, but I don't think you should. I think it's far better to try and like figure these things out as to how they work and contour. Because this dome of the head, like, how does it logically get to this point of the jaw or the chin? Like, logically, well, we know from like this one over here, like, there is this flange possibility. So there's like this come from the orbital bone, maybe there's like a flange that comes back. And then we have an idea, like rather than it just being a half circle that creates the temple, maybe there's like a more of a structure here. And then after you have this flange of the cheekbone, maybe it's a flange that goes like this, and then like there's like this one that has a flange, right? So there's like this this contour in here that you need to get, and then you need to like somehow get this back to this position. It starts to become so much more specific. As to what contours are there. Like, do we do it this way? Like, this is way too big. There's no temple that big on anyone. So I would say the temple starts more along the midline of that sort of orbital, like almost up to the brow. So the brow kind of like comes into this, not this bottom side, and sort of underneath here. Like maybe around the nose or something is kind of where you get this. This flangey thing is like almost halfway down the nose. So how does that work? You've got this thing up by the brow, but then you've got all this room. So maybe it's like bigger here. And then it shrinks off into this back portion where it gets to this hole. Like you might think this isn't practicing drawing, but this is literally what drawing is figuring out this. Because when you're doing like different things where you're drawing the thing and you like this and this and this, like where you're drawing a specific thing, you either know the line because you've got a reference, like a reference tells you, oh, you've got to use this line here. And you're like, oh, okay, so there's that line there. And you're like, oh, I'll change it. And maybe I want to change it this way. Like reference tells you everything of this, but it doesn't allow you to imagine it. It doesn't allow you to follow it. Which is a skill that you need to build if you want to understand how to rotate things in your head and stuff. So that's what I'm trying to figure out here. Like you can see, I'm rotating here inaccurately by trying to understand the series of changes. Like this is a series. So I don't think this would ever go back that far, the temple. I think the temple goes back to like maybe where the cheekbone goes back to. Like I don't think it ever goes back to like the ear. Maybe it almost does. Maybe it almost goes back to like the point of the ear, but maybe the like this is my philosophy. I think it's okay to guess and to be wrong if you know the answers exist. Like if you know the answers exist somewhere, then being wrong doesn't matter so much because you're always gonna figure that out at some point. looking real goofy. Where do I think the turning point of this cheekbone is? I mean, it's got to be here, right? And it's like, why does it go back to this position? I mean, it has to. And then you have like a cheek, which turns around. But it doesn't fully do that. It's kind of like a little dome, right? And then behind it, there's that big band of strength and jaw muscle, or just bone. No, there's always muscle. There's always muscle behind that cheek. I have a cheek. And then there will always be a band of muscle. And then it's bone. And there's always going to be this like crook thing that happens here. Give you the muscles that go to the lips. And it's going to be this upwards turn. And somehow it gets back to this jaw position. Somehow. There's this gap which the teeth are in. Teeth are in this gap. And that probably is like more of a horseshoe shape, right? And so that means there's a horseshoe shape connected to the jawbone itself. So if we were looking from the top of the jawbone, like it would have to have, for its teeth, a thing like this, and like maybe then bones are doing this or whatever else, other stuff. So if it's a horseshoe shape, we're talking like, what's this? So some sort of almost equilateral triangle. Like if you go from this point to the opposite point, it would be at this point in the head, down like this, right? So this point, so this point, sort of this is coming at this angle. So maybe it'd come to a point about here. And maybe that's what's happening, is you're getting that U shape, this U shape and this triangle that's coming from points on each side of the head. We're getting this kind of thing, and this Okay, so that bone on the side of the head. I think there's like this strange contour at the back of the head there as well. Like I think because muscles connect in here or something. Wait, let me check on my own head. So yeah, at the back of the ear, you have the start of like the trapezius muscles. Oh God, that's another set of things I need to understand. Oh my God, it's not enjoyable. Temple doesn't go up that high. It goes up like maybe that high. It's not that crazy exaggerated. So when you've got this forehead, I suppose there is like a bow somewhat, and then it starts bowing more. As it gets to there, and then how does it sort of probably drops off? So it probably does something like this, but then as it turns, it probably like more steeply turns, but not quite like that. Probably, yeah. So it's like an exponential kind of thing. I don't see it 100% working like that. I wonder. Okay, so if I was drawing a head, it would be like bigger at the back, right? From the top side. And then you'd get like this shape. And then you get this sort of thing, right? That's how a skull is shaped, that kind of egg shape. So at the temple region, maybe it's a bit more like this. The ears are a bit far out from the front of the head, but you might get this sort of shape, right? Like if you was to scan through different series layers, you might get something like this, which has an indentation like that. And so this curve, it might even like go back inwards. So if that's happening on that part of the head, that means that this is turning, and then it drops off, and then it goes back into that thing, and then it's got this very, very slight sort of expansion out. That's probably pretty important to understand. Maybe I should just study some some skull scans for these series. It would help. But I mean, it's also good to just go through this exercise. See, if I'm looking from underneath a jaw, we know that a jaw is always going to have a mandible that's like a horseshoe shape, right? So if we're looking underneath the jaw, I don't know what happens with the shapes and thicknesses of these bones. I could guess from like other animals. I don't know. And then how would you construct the rest of the head above that? I mean, we know that it's like halfway, right? So there'd be some sort of thing that's happening. Like we've got the back of the head. That would be along here. And that's going to get to a front of the head. We know that the eyes aren't going to be, like the cheekbone isn't going to be at the very front of the head, like, at least not all the way, because we've got to get the cheekbone to like here, and then like then there's going to be a bone that comes back, it gets to the ear, so there's going to be an ear here, or whatever, and you got the top mandible as well. Okay, so I think this has to be somewhat smaller, because you've got to like fit the teeth on the inside of that. So there'd be like a contour kind of thing, this. Interesting. Interesting. It's difficult to imagine from the bottom. Like I do wonder. Like I know it's going to hit the base of the skull here, but like what's happening in here? I mean, essentially what you're just going to see is the palate, right? For the sinuses and things. Hmm. Hmm. Whenever I draw a face, these are the kind of like things I'm thinking about, by the way. Like when I draw a face, like I don't care about these starting things at all. They're like nothing. I'll be thinking about like this section around here of the cheekbone. I'll be thinking about the section around here of like the eye, like the brow of the eye kind of thing. I'll think about like the transition of this part of like the nose coming into like into the face. I'll think of like the underside of the nose. That transition's quite simple. There's also this weird transition, like this part, like you've got the eye, right, and then it's, I don't know, whatever. Let's say we get to here. at this portion, just above the eye, there's like this fat pad, which weirdly transitions into the eyebrows and stuff. It's like an eye cheek or something. It's weird. Like it's a fat pad on the corner of the eye, which sort of allows it to rotate and twist up to like this part of the eyebrow where like the eyebrow sort of comes around it. And like up here, you've got like an eyebrow that follows like whatever's happening with the brow. I don't know. But like there's this fat pad which kind of gives this lift to the eyebrows and stuff. And I don't know. You've got like the underside of the eye, which is this it's like a holder, like it holds the eye in, and you've got that on the top side, obviously. This is this smooth transition of the cheekbone. Like I'll be thinking of that smooth transition. This thing, we know this is going to go back. We're going to get like a temple somewhere here, sort of a transition along. Like there's going to be that stretch along the forehead, and then it's going to curve back into the shape, and then it's maybe even going to go back in, and then it's going to come back out or whatever to get to wherever this is. So I don't know, this is coming back like the sunglasses thing to a point at which there's an ear canal. This is coming back up here. Then we have this sort of groove for the cheekbone, right? So this is the soft turn of the cheekbone, but then there's like a secondary aspect of the cheekbone, which is the side cheekbone. So you'd get like different shadows on this turn. This turn would have like shadows changing in a gradient along here, and it would sort of end here and sort of sharply change across here, where you get like a difference in the turn of that, and this would be much darker if we're getting light front on kind of thing. And this, I would say this portion along here is sort of almost like this cheekbone area. So there's this turn that's happening around a gradient. So not too dark, but then by the time you get here, it's like a little bit darker. Then below this cheekbone, you have the cheek, like literally a cheek. And the cheek comes to the position where you've got these nasolabial folds coming off the nose that come from the back of like where the nostril is, from where the plane change shift is. You've got like that begins tell you like quite a bit about the cheek. And like obviously if they're smiling, the cheek's going to be a bit higher and stuff. But like this cheek is also got like a portion at which it turns away from the initial source of the light, and then a point at which it gets darker because it's starting to hit into these muscles rather than it being part of the cheek. Then it's going to hit the bone that is essentially behind this area. Then from the angle that we know that this head is at, we can do something that we know it's like a triangle, right? Like there's a point here, comes down, point, comes down, and what angle is this? I don't know. And then what is this? We're looking up, right? So there's an upward angle to it. Upward angle like this. An upward angle that gets to where doesn't look particularly good. It's kind of terrible. Yeah, that's a mismatch. Okay. We are looking up. His cheek turns and it goes into like this jaw thingy. I think this is off. It's more just going to be a bump. Okay, maybe I'll put some music on. It's going to be annoying funk, so yeah. That's maybe too annoying. Okay, so here I'm just trying to I'm I'm speeding through iterations. That's why I can't speak. Because I'm like, okay, there's this thing with this cheekbone here, and then there's this nasolabial fold, but then the nasolabial fold is on like the front plane, and then after the nasolabial fold gets to this part of like the lips, it starts joining with the contour of the jaw. Like it starts to like merge into that, except where the cheek is. It doesn't do that yet. There's kind of like a small roll that happens behind the cheek until it gets to like a nice little part of the jaw. And there is a nice little section of the jaw here that's kind of like it's coming from it's got like a muscle, and there's like cheekbone, like back of the cheekbone kind of thing going on. And there's something nice happening around that. Like something kind of gentle or whatever. I don't know. This skull shape is messed up. Like one of the funny things of like skulls and heads is like whenever you're drawing the face, it's connected to a certain perspective. So you might, and an eye level. And so the eye level here is like underneath this person. So if there's a horizon, that's where it'd be. But like, it looks like this jaw is open. So like there's this contour like this of like the top of the head. And then like the jaw is dropping. So like you could get like a get like an expression in there or something. Because maybe otherwise it would have to be like here and sort of come back like this. Let's make it a closed jaw then. Let's break that so that you don't think that that's connected. So there's this cool part of the jaw. There's like even a mandible muscle in that, which can cause like a small bulge, which can be interesting. Like I'm getting all these things slightly off. I know I am. So as this goes into the under cheek, you know, there's kind of like a suction, right? A little bit of suction that happens. It comes up to the point that you get to the outside of the lips. No, there's like a bulge before you get to the outside of the lips. There's like another second cheek, right? And I think that's more on the top side. No, I don't know. Maybe it's more on the top side. I don't know exactly where it is. Then what happens with the lips is I've got the horseshoe shape with the jaw. You got a horseshoe shape with the lips as well. So they're horseshoe shape and doing something, right? Because they come out of the face. They're not directly connected. Like they're not flat. So you get like a corner of the lips that has like this dimple. And then, yeah, you have like a Cupid's bow, but that like contours and you get like this bottom turn type thing. It's this cheekbone, there's like this thing, and then there's like a cheekbone, and then cheekbone turns around. Then you've got this orbital thing, this thing. And then that goes up into like that fat thing, like on the top of the eye, which then gets the eyebrow. You've got this thing inside here, which then you've got this little sac thing under the eye. You've got one over the eye. And so then the second part of the eye, like in here. And then you got like cheekbone, and cheekbone comes into cheek. cheek comes into jawline. See, these lips are wrong because that U shape should come back to where the nasolabial fold is there, and so oh god. And this bridge under the nose. And then you've got like this nasolabial fold, and then this goes into the cheek. It's the cheek, and then this is the cheekbone, and the cheekbone then has to merge into the thing. Okay. So we've got those contour lines. What's going on here? So I think the forehead's a bit more like this direction. And it's going to tuck in behind that ear. And then you've got the muscles that are going to like be like cylinders, right? Gradient, darker side. should probably do the same thing with hair, to be honest. Like figure out the series of the different topologies. But I'm not not that inclined. So I'm just thinking now about the contours of the head that I've just described and like how that works. Like for example, along this line along here. Oh yeah, I should make that like super red. Like along this line, like how this goes back in and then it comes back out. I'm like, that's like an interesting set of like contours. Or like maybe it's like doing this a bit more. Because of this, maybe it's like out like this a bit more. And maybe it's not fully in like that. Maybe it's a little subtler, like this. And then here, it's really kicking out. Like, I don't know how to like memorize that. I know that that's gonna come over like this or something. I'm just thinking about how much volume is back here. because there's actually a lot of space. This is like as much as there is forward, there is backwards. So if there was stuff coming from the front along this contour, so this is more realism or semi-realism, but it's a similar thing for the contours of like an anime face, which is more doll-like. Maybe I should like transition into that. Like maybe with colors over the top or something. Just pick a just random skin tone y thing. And then is there paint? Let's do hard brush, whatever. Let's just do it with like lighting from the front of the face. It might not be the best, but whatever. Let's just do it from the front of the face. So darker, more red, more down. Let's go more red, more dark. No. This section. It's very gray. Oh man, this is so bad. Whatever. Looks like Sarah Connor or something. Ah. Alright, whatever. I'm not particularly good at light right now. I still don't understand the series and the contours and how it's changing. It's so strange. Ew. Hmm. Oh, I'm kind of done. It looks miserable. Whatever. Fuck. Whatever. Alright, I'm done. Okay. Take it easy, everybody, and have fun learning. Alright, bye.